It was Pentecost Sunday in the year 563 when a group of 12 men were led by one man by boat, arriving here on this very beach. This man would go on to found a series of monasticism and abbeys around these islands, changing the course of history forever. And that man was Saint Columba. The story of St. Columba didn't just start here. In fact, it started centuries before, just beyond the horizon here, on the island of Ireland. Much of what we know about St. Columba comes from a biography of his life, written by one of his followers and ninth successor, the abbot St. Adomnan of Iona. St. Columba was born on the 7th of December in the year 521 in Garton, County Donegal. Born into the Irish royal family O'Neill and in line to be High King of Ireland, St. Columba was destined for a higher calling still. His name Columkill meant dove of the church, although it is unclear if this was given to him at birth. Upon growing up, he entered a monastic school under St. Finian, who himself had learned the faith on the shores of Galloway at the Candida Casa, founded by Scottish St. Ninian. St. Columba became a monk and priest and founded several monasteries around Ireland. However, in the year 560, legends attest the relationship between St. Finian the teacher and his student Columba would sour. St. Finian disputed the right of St. Columba to keep his own personal copy of a scribe psalter at Movila Abbey, seen perhaps as the world's first copyright case. The dispute widened to involve clan factions, resulting in many deaths at the Battle of Cull Drivna in 561. Only with the defence of St. Brendan of Birr would Columba not be excommunicated for his role in the quarrel. Rather, he would be exiled from Ireland. Ashamed and his conscience heavy, he took 12 men in a curragh, a small boat, and set sail north until Ireland was out of sight. This legend, however, is not referenced in the most trusted sources on the life of St. Columba, nor mentioned by the Venerable Bede in his histories. It has been suggested that Iona may have been offered to him by Conall MacGoncail, King of Dalriata. The island of Iona itself was on the edges of the kingdom of Dalriata and the border with Pictland. It was to this pagan land that Columba wished to be a pilgrim for Christ's sake. It was from this very spot, on a windswept remote island on the edges of Western Europe, that Columba founded an abbey and a movement which was spread throughout Scotland and the rest of the British Isles, spreading the beliefs and the creed of Christianity. St. Columba is viewed as one of three principal evangelists of the Gospel in Scotland, along with the first apostle of Scotland, St. Ninian of Galloway, who ministered and preached in the south of the country, along with St. Mungo, who preached in lowland Scotland and Lanarkshire.
St. Ninian, St. Mungo and St. Columba are the big three of the story of the early days of the faith in Scotland. St. Columba came in the year 563 from Donegal, and his main area of activity were the Highlands and Islands. And he is a patron saint of the Diocese of Argyll and Hills, and also Dunkeld. At the same time, a contemporary of him, St. Mungo, based in Glasgow, and St. Columba an abbot, St. Mungo a bishop. There is a story that they met. Some say this happened in Renfrewshire, but I prefer the story that it was in the banks of Loch Tay. They exchanged pastoral staffs, or croziers, and the story goes, recognising each other, recognising each other's area of competence and respect for each other.
The small island of Iona at that time was a harsh and cold place to be. Rugged, windy, inaccessible. Yet despite the tough environment, we see through the poems and hymns attributed to St. Columba that he saw God in the wind, the rain, and in the land. This was no surprise, as Celtic Christianity grew up and sprung from a pagan culture. There was, however, enough natural resources to sustain the flourishing monastic community.
This area of the island beside the sea is known as the Maca. It's an area where centuries of saints have toiled this land. It is here too that Columba spent his days toiling in this holy ground. The story goes that Columba's famous white horse would carry milk and vegetables inland.
Once his monastic community was established, St. Columba would use Iona as a base to evangelise the Picts of the Scottish Islands and Highlands, to fulfil his penance for his sins and to win more souls to Christ. His reputation grew, and legends suggest he banished a ferocious water beast from Loch Ness, who was attacking one of his followers. This, perhaps, is the first written record of the Loch Ness Monster. Such was his renown, that at Inverness he won the favour of King Bridie of Pictland, allowing he and his followers greater freedoms in preaching the gospel, founding churches and establishing learning centres across Pictland. St. Columba and his monks were pioneers in the placing of large Celtic crosses to mark locations. The only one standing on Iona left in its original position is St. Martin's Cross behind me, which has been here for 1,200 years, containing intricate carvings of biblical and religious themes. St. Columba and his movement left physical traces on the landscape, and it was commonplace to see large Celtic crosses dotted all over. The simplistic design of the Celtic cross might not appear striking to us today, but to the ancients it was a bold statement. The cross was superimposed over the Druidic circle representing the sun god. It was a statement that Christianity was here to replace the old religion. Around this time, Columba played an increasingly greater role in national politics. Such was his intellect and learning. In the year 574, he crowned Aidan King of Dalriada, the first of such a ceremony. He also made numerous returns to Ireland as a diplomat, securing financial independence from Scottish Dalriata from the rest of the Irish kingdoms. Iona became an important regional power base. It is believed by archaeologists that this small mound here was the original site of St. Columba's wooden hut, where he would write and edit manuscripts, enjoying commanding views of his abbey down below. One of the finest examples of insular manuscripts produced is the Book of Kells, which was believed to have been compiled and written in part on the island. It is thought also to contain manuscripts written by the saint himself, while other sources credit its creation on the island a few hundred years later. What is certain is that it attests to the intellect, beauty and Catholic spirituality of life here on Iona. Of course, there are a number of legends surrounding life here on the Isle of Iona, but these are constantly being challenged and affirmed by archaeological work. For example, today a group of archaeologists are digging a deep trench to discover more about the boundary wall which surrounded the abbey, and we're hoping that they will find something new and insightful about this wonderful spiritual place.
Okay, we're a project from the University of Glasgow sponsored by Historic Environment Scotland, and we're looking at some old walls here that appeared in an old excavation and trying to work out what they are, and we think it's the foundations of an old chapel predating the Benedictine monastery of 1200, so it's all very exciting.
We're just excavating an old trench that was done in the 1950s by Charles Thomas, and he was working here to try and understand the origins of the early medieval settlement here that Columba founded. And so what we're looking at here is a section through one of the banks, a ditch, and then another bank that would have been part of the early boundary of the sort of a monastic enclosure. And so what we're trying to understand is if this is an original feature that was sort of built as part of the monastery, sort of defining the boundary of their land, or whether it's an earlier feature, even perhaps prehistoric, that's been sort of utilised later and sort of built up. So we're trying to get a sort of a chronology for the different features and understand a bit more about the method of construction, and whether it's something that's been built all in one go or whether it's been reused and repaired over the years.
Advanced in years and sensing the end, he visited all of the island, blessing the land and crops. It is said that the final lines he wrote were Psalm 34. But they that seek the Lord shall lack no good thing.
Here in Iona, in the abbey behind me, on the 9th of June in the year 597, St. Columba raised his hand in benediction to his community and breathed his last.
St. Columba was famous in life for his prophecies, and he foresaw that no one would attend his funeral. This came to pass when at the time for his requiem mass and burial, a storm prevented dignitaries from far and wide being unable to attend due to rough sea on the Sound of Iona. Columba's body was wrapped in clean white linen and carried by his brethren and buried on the site of the abbey. After the saint's death, his community continued to flourish in peace, with the Columban style of monasticism spreading to Lindisfarne in England.
Perhaps the most important part of this site here in Iona is this small, unassuming building behind me. For this building was the shrine of St. Columba. The small stone building which we see here today was built in the year 800. In the year 825, the Abbot Blathnick was slain whilst trying to protect this holy site.
Despite the remoteness of Iona, the abbey suffered frequent attacks from Viking longships who would plunder the abbey for its treasure. The peace of Iona would be shattered by constant threats from the sea. in the 8th and 9th centuries, Viking attacks would become frequent, as the exposed island succumbed to wave after wave of longship arrivals. Much of the fine church objects, manuscripts, precious metals and materials were lost in these Viking raids. For example, we're here on the White Strand of the monks. During very many Viking raids, many monks were killed here, 14, and it was said that the pure white sand was dyed red with their blood. As the crisis worsened and the threats became too much, the Columban monks relocated their base to Kells in the centre of Ireland, taking with them the remains of St Columba, which were divided between Scotland and Ireland, as well as other items of importance, such as the Book of Kells. Iona, however, remained an important place of spirituality and devotion, although the centre of power in Scotland shifted with the creation of a more centralised nation-state and Scottish monarchy. This cobbled street, Shred na Marv in Gaelic, or the Way of the Dead, is thought to be 1,000 years old and was the passage place from the abbey to the adjacent graveyard. Over time, thousands of people are likely to have passed this way to their final resting place from the abbey. As stability returned and Viking attacks decreased, with the changing political tides over the centuries, focus once again shifted to Iona as one of many sites of medieval pilgrimage and devotion.
Such was St Columba's holiness that following his death devotion to him grew, and it's believed that on this site 48 kings and queens of Scotland have chosen to be buried. These include the first King of Scotland, Kenneth MacAlpine, and the well-known King, Macbeth. The site continues to be a popular place of burial to this very day. One of the most recent burials is the famous Labour leader, John Smith, who died in May 1994.
In the 12th century, Iona was still a coveted place, and it fell under the control of Somerled, a Gaelic Norse warlord, whose descendants were many powerful families, such as the MacKinnons, MacLeans, MacLeods and MacDonalds. Many of these families were buried in Relig Orain, the adjacent graveyard to the abbey. St Ronan's Chapel, the only building to remain intact since its construction, was used as a family chapel in the graveyard. Over the centuries, in the Middle Ages, the MacDonald family were powerful and adopted the title the Lord of the Isles. This family were influential, and they invited Benedictine monks to construct their own monastery on the site of St Columba's original monastery. It is possible that many of the Columban tradition monks who remained were invited to join this new order. The Lord of the Isles ensured that Iona and St Columba would remain embedded in the national consciousness throughout the centuries. Such was the importance of St Columba. It is believed that the relics of the saint were carried in the Battle of Bannockburn against the English in 1314. The renown of St Columba was not just in his homeland. In 1428, Pope Martin V acknowledged Iona's holiness and declared a special indulgence to visitors to the abbey on the saint's feast day of June the 9th. Popular at that time was the St Andrew's Way, a pilgrimage route leading from Iona across Scotland to the town of St Andrews in the east. The awareness of Iona and what it stood for as a Catholic place of sanctity and devotion and pilgrimage meant it fell victim to the Protestant revolt of 1560 monasticism was ended and the abbey ruined.
The present building behind us dates from the 15th century, but sadly it fell into ruin with the end of monasticism at the Reformation, only to be reconstructed in the 18th century.
In 1899, the Duke of Argyll, who at that point owned the island, decided to transfer it to the Church of Scotland. Work began on the restoration of the abbey in 1938, after the founding of the ecumenical Iona community by the Reverend Minister George MacLeod. And with the rise in tourism and knowledge of Iona as a special place, numbers of visitors continued to boom into the 21st century, attracting people from all over the world, not only in pilgrimage, but in the warmer months for the island's stunning natural beauty.
Meraviglioso, abbiamo fatto delle escursioni stupende, abbiamo visto l'isola di Staffa, qui l'isola di Iona, meraviglioso.
We came because we have a wonderful pastor who this is his 5th trip of bringing members of the church for a pilgrimage. And our Tacoma, Washington church is, I guess, a member of the Iona community, yeah? And so we are fortunate enough to do that together, and it's pretty amazing to be on this oldest rock on the planet and come to face with some of our oldest issues.
For centuries, pilgrims have come to this very beach and selected a stone. They then cast away the stone into the water, representing throwing away anything which would hold them back from a full Christian life. Similarly to other pilgrimages, such as the Camino, where pilgrims return with a scallop shell, here on this beach, pilgrims select an Iona stone to take home as a remembrance of their visit.
However, it would not be until the 26th of July 1991, with the construction of the Catholic guest house, Maca, that the Catholic faith of St. Columba and the Holy Mass would return to the island after 400 years of absence. Columba's last words still echo around this island. Have unfeigned love for one another with peace. If you keep this course according to the example of the holy men and women of old, God, who strengthens the good, will help you, and I, dwelling with him, shall intercede for you.
Despite the passage of time and centuries, the spirit and legacy of St. Columba lives on here on this holy island of Iona. May the cross of Christianity, which St. Columba first planted here all those centuries ago, live on and spread throughout the whole world.